right, we're back. Tell me you're joking. Got another episode here. We're going to be talking all things St. Louis today. Ward Alderman joining me from the 5th Ward. I'm rolling us in with a little K-Chic classic in honor of those that have left us. The Ozzy Osbourne. Been on an Ozzy kick lately. Actually, not because of his death, but because of a young artist by the name of Youngblood, Y-U-N-G Blood. He did a cover of this song at literally Ozzy's last show, and it's been blowing up, and it kind of brought me back into the Black Sabbath catalog and fun, and lo and behold, Ozzy and Sharon did what they said they were going to do, found a little nook, went away, and he went to the other side, and we're left with the music, so I figured I'd throw a little honor out here to Ozzy, because again, this is St. Louis. This is the home of KC95. Without KC95, how many artists just wouldn't have become as big as they became, right?
It's amazing, right? KC was the soundtrack to my summers when I was cutting grass and trimming lawns and working out at parks when I was a teenager. So yes.
So there you go, Matt Devoti joining me today. What do you think? Are you an Ozzy fan?
I am not. No,
Were you a Black Sabbath fan?
No, my speed is more Tom Petty, more Heartbreakers.
Oh, there we go. A little more melodic, a little more rhythmy guitar rock.
Yes.
Look, there's nothing wrong with Tom Petty at all. What's your favorite Tom Petty song?
Oh man, "Running Down a Dream" is probably the one that'll get me going. Love it.
Yeah, I think I'm like American Girl. A little bit more crunchy,
more the rock. Yeah, and that's a little earlier too, right?
Well, and also he was he's one of those artists that kind of transcended the simplistic genre that was rock and roll. Because he got into the Wildflowers album, and he could pull off a ballad too.
The later stuff, the Wildflowers. Now was a little too ballady-ish for me.
Yeah,
I'm thinking more in terms of the late '80s, the '90s Petty. That kind of era of the Heartbreakers. I mean, that was my wheelhouse.
You strike me as a potential Billy Squier fan as well. Am I close?
Close, yeah.
Maybe not. Yeah, there we go. Well, hey, I appreciate you coming in here and joining me. We were talking before hit the red light to get this popping off here about the why. And as I mentioned, the point of the show is really to kind of bring individuals in that, from around the region, the area, St. Louis in particular, and let's just see what's going on, and get a little bit of background, get a little bit of feelings, the 10,000-foot view. But then, I like to get into the weeds a little bit because we're all living it, right? Somebody asked me the other day over in the Soccer Dad Pod world, which is, we're touching a lot of markets across the country, and somebody had asked a question via PM. What's the best thing to do in St. Louis? What is kind of one of those like brand questions. You're a St. Louisan through and through.
Yep.
Let me just start there because I have a hard time answering that question for people. I have my opinion, which tends to be kind of the more the gutter side. But if somebody were to ask you, St. Louis, what is its brand? What would you say in 2025 here?
I think in 2025 it's food. Now, I'll tell you, JB, that my background is a restaurant family. So food is, I guess, at the foremost of my brain, and it's been for a very, very long time. But I think of food. I think of drink. I think of places where you can sit, you can have a beer, sit across the table from somebody and just enjoy a meal and talk and hang out.
Yeah, I don't disagree at all. Because I think like when you get into the weeds of define your market or your MSA, what works, what doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't matter what the industries are. At the end of the day, everybody eats and drinks, right?
And it crosses across the neighborhoods too. And I think that's the beautiful thing about St. Louis is that food can really mirror what neighborhood are you in. And it gives you a true flavor for where you're sitting down and where you're having your cocktail, where you're having your drink and your meal.
So Fifth Ward, I know that there's been some map changes recently and some consolidation in numbers. Give our listeners an idea. Fifth Ward, what is the Fifth Ward today?
So Fifth Ward today is South St. Louis. We are essentially a triangle.
Yeah.
We stretch from the Hill, Southwest Garden, North Hampton, Southampton.
Okay.
So if you think roadway-wise, we're bordered on the north by Manchester, west Hampton, east Kings Highway, and down south a little street called Rosa Avenue. But for those who know where Bishop DeBerg is, it's that neighborhood.
So that's kind of like if you pulled that wedge out, the amount of history, culture, institutions, etc. I mean, it would be miles and miles long of stories to be told. But to your point, the defining attribute of the city, in your opinion, is food. It doesn't get any more. I'll use the word cliche, but in a respectful way, than the Italian culinary options on the Hill, which is smack dab in the middle of your district.
Absolutely. I mean, it is how most folks, and I think really even people outside of St. Louis, know the Hill, is the food. It is the traditional Italian neighborhood. I think even with that, we've got anything from the casual Italian to the Gitos, the high-end Italian. It's a place that you could go and play bocce at Milo's, but then you can also have your once a year annual outing celebrating a birthday anniversary at a white tablecloth place.
So the Hill, the demographic of the Hill has been rapidly shifting, is a polite way of putting it.
Without a doubt.
Previously there was a lot of like generational turnover, almost like a flywheel effect of families that tended to be of Italian descent or, a cousin of a cousin, something like that. But the Hill has become, it's kind of, it's a victim of its own success to the degree that the demand has brought in a lot of different cultures, et cetera. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean that it's popular, right? And I think back to, closed down a little while ago, but it had a long, tremendous run, and that is Modesto. Tapas. Yeah, well, that's not Italian, right? But it became synonymous with the Hill as part of that food culture. Do you see? Why do you think that was? Why do you think Modesto was able to really kind of, find the crack, find the property, lean in, not have, lead with toasted ravioli or pasta? It led with a completely different kind of culinary cultural option, and it thrived. What would you attribute that to?
I think it's attributed to a restaurateur having guts, saying, I've got a product that I think people are interested in. I know that there is a neighborhood that people will travel to outside of the city, and I'm going to open my place up there. I think a good kind of a next generational example of that is the folks at Sato that do a wonderful job with sushi. And when the word got out on the Hill that we were having a sushi place, there was, from the old guard, a tremendous amount of angst. There was a lot of hang-ring. But today, folks in the neighborhood are proud that place has its roots on the Hill.
Yeah, we were over, we were in our property on Shaw there, the Gaslight building, at the time when all that was popping off. I was really kind of blown away at the volume of the negative response out of the gate, because I felt like, we all knew kind of what was playing out and, everything that happened, and here comes this sushi option. And if you get past the introduction of the book of what this business was going to be, you start to find out, hey, this is a powerhouse restaurateur. This dude knows what he's doing. It's going to be good press. It's guilty by association, all this other stuff. The hatred was really on volume level 11. you saw it happen in real time. Can you speak to that just from a politician's perspective, because that wasn't really a good look.
It wasn't a good look, but I think the interesting thing in retrospect is a lot of the nastiness was coming from folks that no longer lived on the Hill, no longer worked on the Hill.
Yeah, that's true.
But had an association with the neighborhood, maybe through an uncle or an aunt, grandparents, heritage in some way, and they have moved on, and they had left the neighborhood. So they had this concept of the Hill from the mid '80s or earlier, and then the thought that we had sushi coming to the Hill messed with that historic memory of or recollection of this is the neighborhood.
Yeah,
I truly think I was on the neighborhood association board at the time. That folks in the neighborhood, people that lived around the restaurant,
wanted it.
Yeah. And it was overwhelming. So I think we've got to be very careful about talking in terms of where was it coming from. I think the neighborhood, the people in the neighborhood had arms open from the very beginning. It was the folks that had once had an association and had moved off and had this concept of what the neighborhood was that didn't match up with what it is.
So along the same lines, I'm listening to kind of point out the obvious, and I didn't really look at it that way, but I completely agree that a lot of the vitriol was really coming from a social media perspective, and you didn't know who these people were, and then when you did do a little bit of digging, you're like, okay, well, you're on Wildwood. We're not hurting the whole NIMBY thing, right?
Yep.
And if now look at the timing. The large development is another example. The apartments. What?
La Colina.
Yes.
The apartments are called Moda. The subdivision, the homes are called La Colina.
Yeah, the townhouses and the row houses and everything, and everything kind of ringing into the big apartment building. And I remember going to those meetings in which, now that was individuals on the Hill that were like, whoa, hell, again, not in my backyard. The project was ultimately approved, and it's thrived. It really, as you go over the Kings Highway Bridge and look west now, you're like, holy shit, that's pretty impressive. Little bit of a different thing going on with that, because a lot of the residents were concerned with density and volume and, who is going to be filling all of these units. Can you speak to, because the restaurant example is one where, like, look, okay, this is a professional restaurateur. This is a really good food option. It's going to bring people to the Hill. This is the kind of thing we need. But adding residences really kind of drove a wedge in a different way. How did you view that? So
let me tell you how I view it today. Let's focus on the positive, and let's focus on where we are today. At a terrific success. Mm-hmm. We brought in more than 60 homes, which means we have more than 60 new homeowners, people that didn't live on the Hill, that came into the neighborhood, that came into the city most often from St. Louis County, right? So it is an example of folks from west of McCausland picking up and moving into the city. And I'll take that every day of the week.
All day.
The second thing is, with respect to the apartment complex, is what we tend to have are young professionals. So we have a building that is filled with young professionals that are now here, where they are walking and they are going to the restaurants, they're going to the bars, they're going to the retail establishments along Marconi. And beyond that, they're getting involved in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
So they are running for positions on the neighborhood association. They are at the events slinging beer. They are picking up folding chairs after Italian Heritage Day, despite the fact they don't have a single drop of Italian blood in them. And that's all positive.
And the wine walk.
And the wine walk. Oh my gosh. So my house is in the heart of the Hill. And so the wine walk is around us. And that's one of the days, if any of your listeners have never been, you come to the Hill, you're going to park, you're going to find a place, and you're not moving until the walk is over. And it is wall-to-wall people for blocks.
So I nerd out over a lot of these types of developments, and specifically, the vitriol sometimes and the confrontation and everything that occurs. It's always interesting to me. And then whenever I zoom out and I start to think of St. Louis from the bigger picture, I think about what happened on the Hill with the locals being not super supportive until they were, right? It took, the activation to occur for them to be like, oh, okay, well, that's not what I was afraid of. I'm good with that. And when you look at St. Louis proper and you consider it, across all the other neighborhoods, we hear all the time, anti-gentrification, and we need way more affordable housing. We don't want this kind of development. Well, everything is like roadblock syndrome. And until we get over that bump, we really don't know. And to your point, on the Hill, we brought in people that were west of McCausland, right? West of Skinker. and we have a population issue. So what can the rest of the city, what can the rest of the aldermen and people in the neighborhood associations, what is maybe the takeaway from that particular project that these other districts should like, hey, I know you're afraid, but here's the upside.
I think that development, the old Magic Chef property, which is what we're talking about, mm-hmm. I think that development is a perfect example as we, and this is easy for me to say as a South St. Louis guy, but as we're looking at what may lie ahead in North St. Louis, particularly with these areas that were just devastated, is we can't be afraid. And the word, which I think should be a dirty word, is parochialism. Yeah. We can't be parochial. It's funny. Before I lived on the Hill, I lived in St. Louis Hills probably for 15 years. And when my wife and I bought our house, bought our parcel, and we talked about moving 2.1 miles up Hampton Avenue, the looks on people's faces were, huh? What? Why?
Yeah.
You live in St. Louis Hills. Why would you want to move 2 miles up the pike to the Hill? This doesn't make sense. And we're talking about two South St. Louis neighborhoods, 2 miles apart.
Oh, yeah.
Who, for all purposes, Hampton was like the Mississippi River in Chippewa, and we've got to let go of that. This is my parish. This is my neighborhood, and be open to different things. The La Colina development and that apartment building on the Hill were completely new. They were new concepts for that neighborhood. At end of day, they brought in hundreds of new folks to the neighborhood. They brought in folks that predominantly didn't live in the city of St. Louis. Mm-hmm. They energized the neighborhood. And I think at end of day, everybody would say that was a good thing, despite all of the angst that went into, hey, we're going to tear down these old commercial buildings that nobody has used in decades.
Oh, yeah. No.
I mean, craziness.
Yeah, don't get me started on historic preservation, because when I hear those terms, all I think of dead project, because it's just, we've jumped the shark on what do we save, right? And I do think that St. Louis is a unique city in so much that, for the bad reason, we go from 980,000 people, now we're at 275. Okay, so when you hear the numbers, it's really simple. Okay, well, 980,000 people at some point lived in houses. Where are those houses now? Well, they're still here. They're just uninhabited, right? So how do you view balancing that historic heritage, whether it's through brick and mortar versus, hey, we got to stop the outflow? How do you view that personally?
This is a timely question, because we're actually dealing with this on the Hill. We have, and I'm sure it sounds like you're very familiar with the neighborhood, but there are a number of structures. Mm-hmm. They are brick, one-story, shotguns, flat fronts, whose fronts are right on the street. Homes that were built in the very early part of the 20th century.
Right.
They line today Edward Street. They line Daggett. They line parts of Marconi. Wilson across from St. Ambrose. Those houses are quickly disappearing. Question why? Because the Hill is a very desirable neighborhood.
Right.
Folks want to move to the neighborhood, but they don't want to live in a 900 square foot, century-old brick building. They want to take it down. A lot of times they want to combine lots, and they want to build a two-story home on that. It leads to some really tough questions about at what point are we beginning to lose the character of the neighborhood? Mm-hmm. Those structures, those buildings do play a part in how people think of the Hill, but yet balancing it with, but some of them are falling in, some of them are uninhabited. We are talking right now as we speak about creating somehow, some way, a historic area that takes up a number of blocks in the central part of the Hill that would protect those buildings, leaving plenty of space outside of the historic center, but yet still protecting that center, that core area. But then the question becomes, what do we do? You know, if you come across a structure where the roof is caved in and the floor is in the basement,
it's cost prohibitive.
It's cost prohibitive, and now we've got to be practical about this. And we're wrestling with that right now. And the folks in North St. Louis are going to be doing that very, very soon.
Yeah, no, 100%. And when I hear you describe this type of like the balance between saving architecturally relevant relics versus, development versus free market, all this other stuff, what really starts to come into play is housing costs, and specifically affordable housing, because in the example that you gave, and I know these little one-story brick, flat faces, you're talking about a 700 or 800 square foot little shotgun house, right? That in today's market, you can see a price tag upwards of $200,000 for these. Okay, so when you do the math, you're talking about $280, $290 a square foot, right? And for all of you real estate people, we're going to nerd out here on square foot price for a second. Okay, so but if that thing, if someone takes two lots, right, and they build a 3,000 square foot, let's say it's still architecturally relevant, you're not seeing a commensurate. It's not going to be $900,000. It's not going to be $1 million property. It's going to be in that 600 range to where the square foot price starts to drop. Now, why does that matter? As you well know, when you look at these things, when new people try to come in, you're looking at comps. You're looking at what can you afford. And everybody that's about to sell, they're looking at the same comps. So you can artificially inflate housing values, which is good for those of us that have property in the area, but I saw this kind of mindset and debate going on whenever the big project was going in, because everybody heard how much the apartments were going to rent for and how much these buildings were going to go for, and they were like, who already had their houses, they were complaining about the prices. I'm like, well, hold on a second. Here's how this works. Yep. So here's where I'm going with this. How does St. Louis get out of its own way to balance that? And I hate the term cheap. Like when we compete against other cities for things or tourists or transplants, I hate saying, oh, it's affordable. But how do we maintain this fine line of affordability and still have a neighborhood like the Hill where you can see an explosion, literally a rocket ship of pricing?
If you and I could answer that question, we wouldn't be sitting in this room right now.
Well, that's why we're trying, right?
Yeah. How do we do that? I think it is a neighborhood by neighborhood, and in some ways, almost a block by block. How do we do that?
Yeah.
First of all, I will never understand the argument against development, meaning I'm concerned about what happens to my real estate tax if this guy goes in across the street and builds a bigger, better thing. Your real estate tax will probably go up. Your value may be appraised. But at the same time, we're not talking about thousands of dollars.
No.
And in the meantime, your investment in your building, your home, your parcel also just went up. And none of us are going to be here forever. So why is that a bad thing? I don't understand that argument, at least when that's the main argument coming at us, right?
For the homeowners.
For the homeowners.
Because there's another side of this equation, and that is the rental market.
Now so now we are getting into a different conversation.
Right.
And this is where it does become problematic. And we do have an issue with not rentals, but specifically short-term rentals throughout the Fifth Ward. The Fifth Ward, and you've heard me describe what our border is a place that when folks come from outside of St. Louis, outside of the metropolitan area, if they're going to do a short-term rental, it's one of the places they look. We're close to the highways. We're close to the food establishments. We're close to where people want to go.
Well, the biggest draw, because we were looking at a number of those properties for just that, and the reason was the demand is stemming from the hospitals. You have a lot of people, a lot of families that come in for multi-day procedures or whatever that are from rural parts of the country, or maybe they're coming here because of our specialists like Siteman, and that demand exploded. How do you manage that?
Well, and that is something that we are struggling with as a board. And we had, before my time, in fact, this past session, there was legislation passed to try to deal with these short-term rentals. But that then becomes an issue from a neighborhood perspective, where the guy across the street and the woman three doors down and the elderly couple across the alley, where if it is a neighborhood full of short-term rentals where people are constantly coming and going,
Transients,
that connection, that web gets lost.
So let's play this. I'll play devil's advocate a little bit, because I've read a lot of articles, and some of the arguments for make a lot of sense. For example, when you have let's say it's a 2-bed, 1.5 bath, little row house on the hill, and somebody bought it and they decked it out and it's VRBO'd, and it goes per night for, say, $400 a night, plus cleaning fee and everything else. Somebody's going to pay for 2 nights. They're going to pay $1,200, right? The kind of people that are renting those things are one, capable to spend $500 a night, and when you start to wrap your head around the whole compare and contrast with a hotel expense or a suite or something like that, you would with sight unseen, you would say that these renters are minimum of middle income or upper middle income to be able to afford something significantly more expensive than a $150 a night Hyatt.
So JB, I'm with you, and those aren't the folks that we're worried about.
Sure.
Who we're worried about are the buildings that are along Kings Highway, where they are billed out as can sleep 12 or 14 people. They are billed out beyond an occupancy.
It's a party house.
It's a party house, and it isn't somebody renting it for $500 a night for 3 nights who's in from Nashville to go to the zoo and the ball game. It's somebody who lives in West County who is renting the house for kids, for teenagers, and they're partying and they're destroying the house and they're messing with the neighborhood on a Friday night.
Throw the book at them.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
And again, it's all about balances, and that's what the legislation this past session attempted to do, is to do away with those one-night rentals where somebody is billing something for an occupancy that doesn't square up.
Yeah, I love the Keys. I love fishing, right? So we go down to the Keys often, and we typically seek out a B&B or something because we do like having our kitchen and everything and being isolated. But the deal is down there, the way that they addressed it, a short-term rental has to be a minimum of like 10 days. So it's not, you don't get a 24, 48, 72 hour, couple nights, here's your $1,500. You got to really buck up, and it's a 10-day minimum. What are some of the ideas or limitations that you guys are kicking around? Because this is a hot topic, because there's a lot of people that, well, number one, they're looking for supplemental income, and short-term rentals are brilliant for that. But there's a global demand for Airbnbs.
So from my perspective, and let me just say, at the board right now, this is not an issue, or at least it's not an issue that's openly discussed, because we are addressing an issue that's in the courts with respect to obtaining variances and licenses in order to run the short-term rentals. So until that is dealt with at the courthouse, we're not going to touch it. We got to see how that litigation goes. Now, from my perspective, I don't know that we need to approach it from the situation that you mentioned in the Keys, the 10-day rental.
Yeah, minimum.
But I do think we need to have a minimum multi-day rental situation. And whether that's an entire weekend, say 3 days, I think that addresses a lot of the issues for the very reasons that you point out. But that one single day rental, when that's a possibility, those are when the problems pop up.
Yeah, those are parties.
Yep.
We know what those are. Let me kind of stay within the city and talk a little bit more about development and strategy. You referenced earlier North St. Louis, specifically. You were alluding to the damage that occurred post the tornado on that Friday. I'm assuming you've been up there. I've been up there. I mean, I've seen a lot of natural disaster posts, mortem landscapes. That's bad. It was bad. And so you compound it with kind of the reality of the north side, the political optics of the whole thing, and you look at lack of jobs, lack of groceries, and here comes this tornado that just says, you know what, I'm going to make it 10 times worse for all of you. From your seat, when you look up there, what's first? What do you do? What do you focus on first? Because this is not a 5-step plan. This is like 78 and then multiply it by 4.
Oh my gosh, yeah. The mayor has put forward a 3-step plan that talks very generally in large steps, right? We're talking about cleanup, and then repair, and then the next step beyond that. I was on the ground quite a bit in the weeks right after. I am a lawyer by trade. I'm a trial lawyer. We organized a group of folks to really do 2 things. We were at the Urban League, and we were also on the ground, going door to door in the area around O'Fallon Park. What we heard a ton of were questions of, I don't have any insurance.
Yeah.
How do I do it? That's brutal, because absent any insurance, the options are just so limited. Those are awful. We also heard a ton of questions from folks that were renters, that were not either receiving any direction or instruction from landlords, whose apartments were not habitable. What do I do? And just issues of, what are my next steps? And then, of course, there was a whole other host of issues of people that maybe had coverage or they had funds, but now they're having contractor issues. The whole group of vultures moving in, coming into town from outside the area, and then preying on these people that should not be preyed on.
What annoys you more, a 3-year-old temp tag or a license plate from Texas with a roofing company on the side?
Equally, right? Equally, right?
I'll tell you what. I mean, that's what it is.
I mean, you just took us off on a tangent, but if I was in Jefferson City, my step number 1 would be dealing with this temp tag issue. I don't think, as a taxpayer, as somebody who licensed my car every single year, there isn't anything that gets under my skin than when I see a tag from 2019
I know.
on a Cadillac, and it doesn't make sense.
No.
But to then go back to your question about what is the first step, I think what we've got to do, that we are still working on as a city, is just basic cleanup, is collecting debris, removing debris, getting those parcels and those folks in a position that they can rebuild.
Do you feel like part of this is also shame on all of us, because for literally generations we've been talking about the Del Mar Divide, and we've been throwing out a whole bunch of theories and potential applications or programs, etc. And to a large degree, the vast majority of those ideas have been just that, just ideas. We've seen very little activation. And then all of a sudden along comes this tornado, and it makes national news, right? Does it bother you that actual, feet on the street is now only kind of coming to fruition because they got slammed.
Well,
Not because anybody's doing the right thing, but because they literally have $1 billion worth of damage up there.
I think it's another example in a line of examples where an issue really comes to the forefront when there's a disaster that focuses everybody on a particular situation. Mm-hmm. And it's across the board. But I think in this, we as South St. Louisans, as folks that live in West County or South County, for many, many years, we could just turn our head and shrug our shoulders and say, not my problem. It's very, very easy to do. I think it makes it even easier when we have an area, a metropolitan area like ours, that is split in half.
Right.
It's easy. And we started our conversation with talking about being parochial and in our own silo. It makes it even easier the way our area is set up. I think what this has done is it has drawn all of our attention to this part of North St. Louis. And if it hasn't, shame on you, if it hasn't woken you up to this idea that it's that old saying of boats rise with the tide, right?
Let me ask you a hypothetical question, then I'd like to take a quick break and then we'll come back. But what you're just now describing, that now it takes the larger community to address it. How do you address, or how do you reply to hypothetical District 5 resident A, maybe sitting, on a patio on the hill on a Friday night that says, what, that's really not our problem? Because that is a predominant opinion for a lot of neighborhoods around here that are south of Del Mar.
You know what that could be? And I'm going to be Pollyanna for a moment. I just had a town hall within the last week, this last Wednesday. We went through the tornado response of the city of St. Louis. We also talked about constituent problems in the 5th Ward. Things like tree trimming, taking down dead trees, dealing with sidewalks, fixing potholes, refuse pickup, whatever it might be. There was probably 4 or 5 people that had hand up that said, Matt, we get it. We get it, we get it, we get it. Are you guys working on it? Is there discussion going on? We can be patient. That's the majority of the responses, JB. Now, I'm not telling you that I don't get an email every once in a while that said, hey, it's been 2 months. Why is my trash pickup not on the dime every Wednesday? Of course that happens. But I think it is the loud minority versus the silent majority that is extremely supportive of the folks on the north side. I truly think that at least in the 5th Ward, the 4 communities I've talked about, the 4 neighborhoods, that there is a thought that we are in this together. And as a city, we've got to do our part. We did, just something very basic like collecting toilet paper and water. Mm-hmm. I ran into somebody this morning at Shaw Coffee that said, hey, Matt, I haven't seen anything lately on your Facebook page. Are you still collecting?
Yeah.
And I said, we're not formally, but if you get it to me, I'll get it to where it needs to go. Matt, I'll have 4 cases of water, a couple boxes of Pampers and some toilet paper to you this afternoon. I truly think that that's the mentality of the vast majority of folks.
Does it feel like we live in a bookend state or a bookend environment in which, look, hypothetically, for example, Cardinals win the World Series or Cardinals win the World Series, and all of a sudden, everybody in the MSA, the whole region, we are all from St. Louis. And then season's over, and we all hate each other. And then here comes a natural disaster, and now, we're all from St. Louis. Why do you, and this is a huge question, but how do we create a little bit more synergy in the middle? Because we can't win every year, and God forbid, tornadoes drop down every other month.
You have just hit a sore spot with me, a pet peeve in this idea that there seems to be 3 areas in Missouri: St. Louis, Kansas City, and everybody else. Mm-hmm. And this notion of why Jefferson City can't leave its hands off of St. Louis and tell us what to do. drives me crazy. I mean, we could get into gun legislation. We could get into the management of the police department. There's a number of things that we can talk about where the question, I think, has to be asked. You know, you brought it up. You know, if the Cardinals win the World Series, if the Chiefs win the Super Bowl, everybody's a Chiefs fan. Everybody's a Cardinal fan.
Right.
But if it's a crime issue, then it's a city of St. Louis problem, not a St. Louis County problem. We're not even going to talk about North St. Louis County or South St. Louis County. We're going to talk about the city of St. Louis. And it's that kind of divide, really from between the metro area and outstate, that does nobody any good. Nobody any good. There's got to be some recognition outstate by our leadership that the way we need to run the city of St. Louis, or the way the folks in Kansas City need to run their area, is very different than the way folks in Rolla or Joplin or Hannibal operate their communities. We are very, very different. And I guess my message would be, hands off. Leave us alone. If we're going to fail, let us fail because of what we did or didn't do, instead of getting in our way and then saying, we told you so.
Well, they all want their picture with the Stanley Cup, right? But none of them want to actually fix problems.
That's right.
The heavy lifting is being done by other individuals.
Correct.
All right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about, I like using, Stelzer's the one, Matt, is the one that always told me, he's like, hey, you know, I don't go west. And I'm like, what do you mean west? 270, Wentzville? He goes, no, west of Skinker. So I want to get in a little bit of that. We've been talking about kind of the north-south divide from within, and even, you know, neighborhood to neighborhood. I want to get into a little bit more of the regional side of things, because there's a much bigger picture being painted, you know, and dealt with that really affects these jobs, et cetera. So if you don't mind, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk about the other side of the road, Little Jeff City, and more.
Let's do it.
All right. Hey, everyone. Thanks for listening. I wanted to give you an update on a new podcast called The B-Side STL. This is a show dedicated to the underbelly of St. Louis, specifically all those things, places, eats, drinks, and activities that typically don't show up on the most recent tourism flyer, but that ultimately defines the neighborhoods we all love and live in. So be sure to subscribe to this pod and catch all the new episodes of B-Side STL. Now, back to the show. Get my seat here. All right, we're back. Right before the break, I mentioned that I wanted to expand out a little bit. We've been talking about, go ahead and fix the headphone there. It's flipped. There we go. What I'd like to do is jump from the north-south divide, and let's talk a little bit about, you know, a little bit more the east-west, and really it's north-south, east-west. It's city versus county. We were just talking off mic about, you know, what that really means, you know, because there's a lot of huge, big picture ramifications when it comes to the structural reality of what we've been living through for far too long, and well, in my opinion, and it sounds like your opinion as well. But just take a second and talk about maybe the embedded relationship. Because in the previous segment, we were just talking about how, you know, Jeff City and those across the state, like, they all want to be part of us when we're winning a world championship, or, you know, a new exhibit at the zoo opens or whatever. But anytime, you know, something dirty pops up, like, you know, hands off, not our problem. What is the ultimate relationship as you see it between the city of St. Louis and the surrounding region?
Well, I think let's start with the most simplistic, and that's St. Louis County.
Yep.
I think the city and the county need to drop our respective chips on shoulder and become one. I think, and we talked a little bit about this off air, I think we need to drop the use of any verbs. Things like merge or absorb need to become dirty words. Because when we use that kind of language,
right,
it's suggesting that one or the other is the lesser piece. And that's not the case. I think we need to develop a slogan. And I'm not a slogan guy, but something as simple as one county.
Yeah.
And we just move forward with the slogan. We are so much better off if we are one, which we are in many ways, but in others we're not. And in the ways we're not, they hold us back. If we are one community of 2.5, 2.4, whatever it is, million people, all of a sudden we have a regional airport that competes with other communities across the country of 2.5 million people. Right. If we're 2.5 million people, all of a sudden we're competing for grants and awards that other communities of 2.5 million people compete for. Well, and we're doing it together.
Yeah, and the big headlines where everybody really jumps on this thing, and it's typically in the Business Journal for the most part, where you talk about, we lost a bid for a new, Amazon was the huge one, but said company X chooses Denver over St. Louis, blah, blah, all these things. And you and I both know kind of simplistically, while not even being in the relocation business, we know how it works. If you are a big company X and you're wanting a new plant, or you're going to move a headquarter, or you're going to expand into another city, you pay consultants to go find it, right? And you tell them, here are the things that are important to us. And one of the first things they do is the basics. Okay, what's your crime rate? What's your schools? What's all that? And right out of the gate, in spite of our infrastructure and our ability and our logistics and frankly, the cost-effective values that are in our region, things, we're not even in the conversation because some of these super simple statistical realities of our division.
And the reporting of crime rate is a terrific example. Mm-hmm. We talk in terms of the city of St. Louis, which is in and of itself a fairly large geographic area reaching from north to south. And of course, our crime data is reported by the St. Louis Police Department as data for the entire city. So not the Hill, not Princeton Heights, not the Ville,
correct,
but for the entire city. Now let's contrast that with St. Louis County, where we've got God knows how many municipal police departments, and then we have a county police force. And in St. Louis County, there are certain communities with those small little departments where we can point to what the crime rate is.
Yep.
And we go, oh my God, we've got a problem in Ferguson. We've got a problem in Jennings. And I don't mean to throw any particular community under the bus, but my point is that there are some where we're reporting based upon small neighborhoods, essentially, small communities. And then St. Louis County is then pulling out all of those unincorporated areas in West County and South County. And so when St. Louis County, the big thing is reporting its crime data, it's purposefully not including the data from those small municipalities, which, we talk in terms of fairness or justice or just in terms of perception. It's a way to skew numbers, and then also for certain parts of St. Louis County to pit itself against the city of St. Louis, which doesn't benefit any of us. So the crime reporting data is a wonderful example of how I think somebody used at one point the term balkanization of this area really, really hurts us as a whole.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because I just... you get those little news stories that come across your social feed, and it's like, Huntley is the safest place in America. Like, I'm thinking to myself, short of just soccer mom selling Adderall in Neiman Marcus lot, nothing goes on. Well, that's not real. That's not something that is... It's not relevant.
So another great example, and this is how we can skew things. Mm-hmm. Before alderman, I served for 5 years as the chair of the Hills Safety Division, right? And I had a very good working relationship with our 2nd District Liaison Officer. We were talking about crime data at one point on the Hill, and he said, Matt, I don't know why you guys are wringing your hands. The Hills crime data is less than Manchester It's less than Baldwin. It's less than Valley Park.
Yep.
You guys have this perception of all these things that go on. Mm-hmm. It's a safer place with even less property crime than places in far west St. Louis County that people think of as the safest. And that's an example. If we want to cherry pick, we can cherry pick all day long to make whatever point we want to make.
So then how do you, now being in the position that you are as an alderman, in which there's kind of an elevated responsibility to not only do the work for your district, but to work with the Board of Aldermen on some of these broader St. Louis City issues. When you view the county and you think of the things that inevitably require regional cooperation, and we, the public, we see it as just this constant standoff. How do we start to take down that wall? How do we create a quid pro quo or a value prop that you think would resonate? Because it feels as if it's all these fiefdoms, the 92, 94, however many municipalities it is. How do we start to convince them that without a St. Louis city, there is no Baldwin, there is no town and there's none of them matter, right?
It's a Herculean task from the standpoint of if folks in far west St. Louis County don't think today that the city of St. Louis adds value to their lives.
Yeah.
What more could we say or do? Interestingly, I grew up in Chesterfield. I don't think that's come up in our conversations, JB. But I was born, raised. I went to public schools, Rockwood School. I'm a Lafayette high school graduate.
Yeah, there you go.
So let's throw that out there. So I am born and bred in a place that Chesterfield didn't even exist back then, right? Mm-hmm. Well, now I'm a city guy. I'm a Hill guy. I'm a Fifth Ward guy. It is something that I think when folks come into the city, they know the value, but they don't want to get hung up on the potential negatives. And I think crime is the big one. And I think it's got to be the education, the sharing of statistics like we just did.
Yeah.
To talk in terms of if we speak with broad paintbrushes, there are places in the city that are as safe, if not safer, than St. Louis County. And by the way, there are parts of St. Louis County that also need work, just like there are parts of city of St. Louis that need work. Right. And if we get together or we row in the same direction, we're all going to be better off. Now, your question was, how does it start? I think it's got to start. It must start with the executives. At some point, our mayor and the county executive need to put heads together and say, we are going to get they call it freeholders, but we're going to get our freeholders together.
Yep.
For the purpose of just casting a vote of, is this something we want to talk about? And that's got to happen.
Well, let's talk about the executive faces. Mayor Spencer, Kara. You have Sam Page, obviously, out in the county, and Governor Keogh. Those three in particular. Obviously, Mayor Spencer's new to the job, right? Just got elected this past spring. Is immediately dealt the tornado that we addressed earlier, and right out of the gate, you see, out of necessity, because of the catastrophe, this pseudo synergy. Cooperation, whatever the word is that somebody wants to use, in which all three had to work together. There was no choice. This was not one where, hey, let's talk about this. They didn't have a choice, because if they didn't show up, all hell would be paid. How would you grade it? How would you grade, kind of as an example of working together, because that's not the norm in our region? How would you grade it out of the gate?
So let me say, from a response background, and again, I've been in office for 100 days.
Sure.
The same as Mayor Spencer. I have been blown away with her responsiveness. not just to the way in which issues with the devastation were dealt with, but her ability to delegate, her ability to set goals, her ability to put together plans, her ability to communicate with different stakeholders, whether it was residents, Northside alders, nonprofits, community leaders, you name it. Mm-hmm. I think, frankly, I can't imagine any person in office for 30 days, for 4 years, managing that response as well as she did. I can't imagine it. The planning, the delegation, the communication, without a doubt. I think she also did an extremely solid job of leaning on Governor Kehoe, mm-hmm. and to the extent she could, President Trump, to say, we need your help. I can remember very early days being at press conferences where Mayor Spencer said, as a community, we're doing our best, but the reality is that St. Louis,
we need help.
That any city in this country could not deal with a disaster of this scale on its own. And she nailed it. And I think what that message did from the very beginning is it wasn't a challenge. It was a challenge. It wasn't a thumb nose either at Jefferson City or Washington, but it was a challenge, and it was a request that we've got to have your help. We need you here on the ground. I think Governor Kehoe, I think the response was solid. I think that he did what he could do. From my standpoint, I was frustrated that it seemed like the state's response to St. Louis and the tornado the tornado work was tied into a stadium in Kansas City. Uh-huh. That special session, the deal being, hey, we'll get you this if we put a package together to keep the Royals and the Chiefs in Missouri. That bothered me some, but I'm not a career politician. I'm the new guy. So when I'm watching that, it irritated me as a city resident.
Yeah, right? I mean, it's not like you, because I feel you, and I've never ran for anything, right? Only from my kids. That's politics. That's how it's played.
It is
quid pro quo. And I've been watching her because you mentioned her engagement to a micro degree with President Trump and the administration as it pertained to FEMA funding and et cetera. And kind of the compare contrast that's going on at the exact same time, that's way bigger, is what Governor Newsom is doing in California and how he's taking on the administration head on, specifically with the wildfires, right? And you can't make this political. You have to be part of this because, in an act of God like that, it's not controllable. There was no raking that needed to be done. It was 140 mile per hour winds throwing embers all over the region, right, in California. Here, it's kind of the same thing. And I think she's done a good job of tiptoeing into the next round in which she does have to take the gloves off. Because eventually, it's one thing to allocate, it's another thing to cut the checks and get stuff done. We are nearing, and at some point we're going to deal with the very real issue of we've gotten to a certain part in the cleanup, mm-hmm. and we need to start with the rebuild. Yeah, what's building?
That's right.
Yeah,
and it's going to start with the infrastructure, and even from an infrastructure standpoint, streets, utility poles, sewer systems. We cannot, as a city, do that on our own. And so we are going to need our partners. I mean, here we're talking about partners, we're talking about teamwork. Let's use another word, collaboration, to work with those partners in D.C. to bring some of that help back to St. Louis.
What about though a revision? Because, hypothetically, I told you that me and some other poli-sci nerds, we spit out these tremendous ideas, at least we believe they are. And here's an event that has destroyed large swath of the north side above and beyond the degradation that had already occurred. What about starting to think outside the box? Before we start to just replace and fix what was there without a true strategy for what comes next, should we start considering if this landmass that did house 980,000 people, 75 years ago is now down to 200, do we need to build all that landmass back, or can we start to be more strategic in shutting down some streets, maybe creating a little bit of density so that the utilities, so that the services that we are bleeding out, from a footprint standpoint, maybe that starts to mitigate. And then what that might potentially do is show the powers that be in the county, well, these guys actually got their shit together. And then it shows Jeff City, well, they're not really wasting all this money because that was a really smart idea. That's what I feel is missing in this process.
And that's a discussion that I haven't been involved in as the guy that represents the 5th Ward.
Sure.
But I think it's an excellent discussion that we will, or I will eventually be involved in as a member of the Budget Committee, as a member of the committee that looks at how are we spending funds, which includes, by the way, the monies allocated toward tornado reconstruction. I think it brings up a very good point, though. We need butts in the seat. The biggest problem the city of St. Louis has is population.
Yeah.
It is serving an area, as you said, that at one point was serving 850 plus thousand people. Interestingly, and I'm going to take it back to the 5th Ward for a minute, we did some analysis looking back over 20 years from a dwelling perspective in the 5th. So again, my 4 neighborhoods, the Hill down to Southampton.
Yep.
We are actually up about 45, 50 dwellings over the last 20 years.
Okay.
So there has been some that have been torn down. There have been others built. We've got about a net gain of 50. Population-wise, we're down about 3-4%. So think about that in 20 years. What is the city's overall population down in the last 20 years?
Yeah, significantly more.
Much more than a handful of percent. Now, what is it? We also have less school kids, but we have more 50, 60, 70-year-olds. Folks that, again, we talked
Boomers.
about it earlier, that lived in West County and that have moved into the city. This is
Yeah.
where they're choosing to spend their golden years. How do we do that north of Delmar? How do we do that in the areas that were touched by the tornado? I think we've got a real opportunity in these neighborhoods to develop and bring in new residents, to bring folks that had at one time their families, their parents, their grandparents moved from North City into Florissant, into Hazelwood, to get them to move the other way.
Yep.
So instead of moving farther west into St. Charles County, get them to make a U-turn from a familial standpoint and turn around and move the other way.
Yeah.
This is our opportunity to do that because everybody's focused. Everybody's focused on the issue. So let's take that focus and put together a plan.
Yeah, I love that because it's more of a repatriation strategy. Because when you think about it, if you have an area in which you're trying to develop and you need population, you kind of have 2 choices as far as who you're going to approach to try and fill, right? The city and a lot of the quote powers that be have had all these grandiose ideas on how we're going to attract these people from the coasts and from these overburdened cities, and it's like that's a really, really hard sell. What if we just tried to resell to the people that already understand the neighborhoods, that left because of some degradation, but see the improvements and can understand it? We don't have to educate them as much as we do somebody from Bethesda that we're trying, no, check this out. You can get 5 of your houses here, right?
I think there's multiple ways to do it, and you're right. I mean, historically, we have looked, and there was an article in the paper just this week, as a matter of fact, that talked about secondary immigrant movement. Mm-hmm. The analogy was to the 90s, I believe, to the Bosnian population that came to America. They settled someplace, and then they secondarily heard what a good place St. Louis was, and they moved into the city. They moved into South St. Louis County. There is thought about that with other immigrant populations today. that is historically the way we thought about it. I mean, on my father's side, both his mother and his father came from northern Italy. They settled some other place. My grandmother's family, they were coal miners in southern Illinois. They heard about St. Louis and they moved on the hill, right?
That's my wife's family. I know all the Wilsonville, Gillespie, all of them.
Heron, Williamson County in southern Illinois. Yeah.
The Bertettos. Do you know the Bertettos?
I don't. I don't know those guys. But I mean that's a common theme. To me, that sounds complicated. I mean, we talk all of the time about folks moving from St. Louis County west or even south, Jefferson County. Let's get them to view the city as the place to be. So if you want to move, and again, now I'm talking competition. So you might have a listener out there that is thinking, wait a minute, Devoti, 20 minutes ago you talked about one county or one area.
No, I know where you're going with this.
And now you're talking about poaching people from the county. I am. But as we stand right now, I think that is one way to repopulate St. Louis City, to populate North City specifically.
Well, and here's the other thing, too. What we're really talking about is the potential to ease the housing issues that we have. Really, it's a national issue, but you look within the region, you have all these people that are like this blind obstinance to what is going on as to why are my kids not wanting to move here, or why are they not wanting to live here? Well, guess what? They can't afford your $600,000 starter there in Kirkwood, Mr. and Mrs. Smith. You know, that's why they're staying out on the coast, or they're moving to a Tulsa or an Omaha, because these are startup cities. And what you're describing is like, look, if we focus on the crown jewel, and I don't care what anybody says, St. Louis is the crown jewel in the region, right? And prove specifically with Northside development and even some depressed segments like Dutchtown and other areas that have taken it on the chin. Well, then that's a bigger story. That's something you can say, hey, look, here's proof of concept. That's what you've always wanted. You wanted us to lower our crime rates. We've done that. Check. You wanted us to repatriate. Check this out. Check, right? We need wins. And that's what I feel has really been missing ever since I moved back here in 2004.
So I think from a positive planning standpoint, we are undergoing a revision of our zoning code. And part of that zoning look is how are we going to organize on a macro scale. Mm-hmm. So that is on a very intellectual side, from a zoning and a planning side. That is going on at City Hall as we talk. And so hopefully we'll see the results of that very, very soon.
Have you read the book Abundance?
I have not, no.
You're familiar with it?
I am not.
Ezra Klein and Thompson. Absolutely brilliant book. And what it is, it's kind of like they gave a little State of the Union, and this will make sense in a second. They did a little bit of a State of the Union through the book as to the lack of progress, specifically on the Democratic side, progressive Democrats in particular, and why the rise of MAGA and the right and these expectations. And a lot of it had to do with and I'm going to simplify the book. Basically, they pointed out that on the left, via laws, they made it, while the laws were morally smart or valuable, whether it's the environment or clean energy or saving houses or whatever, all these things had good intentions, but the byproduct of all of that legislation, of all of those restrictions, was that you stifled progress and development. That's why we have a housing shortage in so many areas that are blue, because you can't build there. And on the flip side, take a state like Texas, and I think the numbers were pretty simple. For every 100,000 residents in California, there's roughly 2 homes built. In Texas, for every 100,000 residents, 22 homes are built.
Wow. Yeah. I didn't realize that, sure.
Yeah, and it was one of those aha moments for me, and I'm thinking about, and I'm hearing you talk about now, that you guys are actively addressing zoning, which is the core of this book, is deregulation. I know, and historically that was a dirty word because everybody remembers, coming out of the Carter years and Reagan deregulating everything, and guess what? Everybody lost their jobs. And I think it has a different connotation or potential meaning now. And I'd love to hear that you guys are talking about that, because if we don't make it easier, quicker, more efficient to build and develop, it's not going to happen.
So that has been something that I have been impressed with being in City Hall that as a resident I didn't know about, and that is the active efforts. So not at the beginning, but actively moving on to reduce red tape. Alderman Schweitzer, who represents the First Ward, is chairing and it is literally a special committee to reduce red tape in the city of St. Louis. And the idea is make it easier for folks to open businesses, to build homes, to build commercial units in the city of St. Louis. That's what we're working on. And that is going on. As a guy that lived in South St. Louis before I walked into the building, I had no idea, but that's going on.
The way I hear that excites me. Like, legitimately, I don't typically, because we normally don't. We hear grandiose ideas. We hear a lot of platitude. We hear a lot of theory and who are we really trying to help. And I mentioned it earlier. You just never see feet on the street. You don't see this stuff activating. But you know who's listening to that conversation? It is the building community, because there is demand here. You look over the past 5 to 8 years, 10 years, all these towers that so many people hate to, love to hate on, whether it's the one on Forest Park or the ones that are in Soulard or Ballpark Village. Everybody's like, oh, these are dumb. But, well, guess what? They're at 100% capacity. There's demand, right?
Sure.
And there's a lot of individuals that are wanting to do more of that because they understand that the market has shifted. Our neighborhoods are not built as they sit to easily attract the current shoppers. Right? And here's my question. In the campaign on the mayoral side, there was 2 camps, as I see it. There was Tashar's camp that was a lot of kind of baked in neighborhood, the OGs that were going to support and be the backbone of the campaign in, St. Louis proper. And Kara, I'm just going to name one name, Bob Clark, was the name that was front and center, in a positive ideas from Kara's side in the messaging, and everybody on Tashar's side was looking at Bob and here come the imperialists, right? And I think that there's nuance there, and it sounds as if a little bit of that desire to truly develop, to build, is starting to percolate to the forefront.
I don't think there's any dispute about that. It is percolating. It is going on with the aim of making City Hall more efficient. The Red Tape Committee is an excellent idea, but there is also talk about how do we address our 100-plus-year-old charter that in many ways holds us back. From very basic things like setting payroll and hiring people. It's a boring discussion. But when we talk in terms of providing city services, making sure that we have enough trash truck drivers and street department workers and guys trimming trees, we are in many ways, in my opinion, we are being held back by a 110-year-old document that was rent for a different time period that makes it very difficult to compete with our competitors. And before you say, well, Matt, who's the competitor? I'm not talking about private industry. I'm talking about St. Louis County.
Yep.
I'm talking about Chesterfield. I'm talking about Maplewood. In my mind, it's not a matter of today. It's not a matter of the city of St. Louis competing with private industry. It's a matter of us competing with other county governments and other municipalities. And we are being held back by a 110-year-old document.
It's so funny you put it that way, because I was the saying that was going through my head was, you're competing for a resident. The county can say, hey, move here. We pick up our trash. That's an embarrassing reality of a large part of the debate that was occurring for City Hall. Like, who can pick up trash better? Who can plow snow? And I'm thinking to myself, if we haven't solved these literal first world or third world problems, then how are we ever going to get to a first world problem of trying to bring in an AI farm or new industry or whatever? We're not even close.
We're not even there because we haven't yet mastered the most basic of things. Let me make very clear, though, too, because over the last handful of months, I have sat down, I'm not going to say every department head in the city,
Sure,
but a pretty good portion of them. I have been extremely impressed with dedication, hard work, and the want to succeed. I've also been extremely impressed that we don't have enough people to do the job. During budget hearings, and this was my introduction to City Hall, I came across a phrase of salary savings. I'm a small business guy. I'm a trial lawyer. I'm a member of a 5-person law firm. I never heard the phrase salary savings. Salary savings refers to the idea that we have a position that is budgeted that we haven't filled. And we have departments that show a salary savings year after year after year.
because they don't hire.
Because they don't hire.
Yeah.
Because they can't hire. Because there's something that stops them from hiring, which often is competitive pay with other like employers. So then the question becomes, why don't we change that? Mm-hmm. And we've got to do it.
Yeah.
This document is killing us, and we've got to change the way our personnel department works. Folks that I think work in HR, that work in private industry, if they would see how things are or have been run from an HR perspective, I think would just scratch their heads and go nuts. And obviously, as a city, as a government, there are certain bases we must step on to make sure that we are being financially responsible to our constituents. I get that.
Yeah.
But we've also got to modernize.
Where would you start? If it's a people problem, as far as like filling positions so that we can get people to actually catch up / speed up basic services, whether it's a liquor license renewal or trash or whatever it is the problem that we don't have enough people here that can fill the jobs? Do we have limitations as to resident requirements? What is the core problem as you see it?
So let's talk a minute about trash. Again, another unsexy conversation. In this year's budget, we added a position whose sole purpose would be taking a look at where residents are, where dumpsters and roll carts are located, and how we run our routes. The idea being is actually studying how are our routes set up, where do we need drivers, and how are we going to do those routes?
Yeah.
That right now we are basically functioning, or in the past we have functioned on inertia. We're doing it because that's the way we've always done it.
Yes.
And so in this year's budget,
that's my route.
And this wasn't alders coming up with this idea.
Yeah.
This was a request of the refuse department of, we need this position. Again, leadership identified a need, said we need this position, we need this capacity, please fund us. And we did. But that's the kind of thing we need to do more of. From a very basic human resources tracking perspective, we heard stories about somebody applying for a job and then the application growing stale because nobody responded, nobody looked at the application. I mean, that's inexcusable.
Yeah, so we need to fill positions, but part of the positions we need to fill are HR positions so that they can look at the applications in order to fill said positions.
Sure.
It sounds like a hamster wheel.
It is a hamster wheel. And again, that was one of Mayor Spencer's criticisms on the campaign trail.
Yeah.
So I know there are things in the works to address those problems.
Yeah.
But I think on the flip side, the idea that those were problems in 2025 on a very basic fundamental level are for the new guy, were pretty hard to understand.
New guy status. So, I've through decades of nerding out over politics, there's, paraphrases of a saying basically stating that anybody that runs for office is incredibly altruistic and hopeful, or they're incredibly bitter and mad. Otherwise, why do it? Where do you fall on that spectrum?
So I came apart, the idea came up because I was frustrated, and I was frustrated in my practice as a city resident. I have handled a fair number of cases over the years against the city of St. Louis. And the cases ranged from people tripping over uneven sidewalks to somebody being in the street because they couldn't access a pathway, to somebody literally dying in an intersection following a motor vehicle crash because we didn't have a prompt response of an ambulance. And it was really that situation where we had, it was like a 44-minute response time to an accident scene where we had an individual on a moped that was struck by a car and had some serious internal injuries that said, I got to do something about this. As a city resident, as a lawyer that has represented injured people, we have to do better. This is inexcusable. We are now beyond somebody tripping and breaking an arm or requiring shoulder surgery. We now have folks dying because of inadequate ambulance response. Whether the issue is dispatch, whether it is lack of personnel, whether it's lack of ambulances, functional ambulances, we must do better. And really that's what pushed me over the edge that said, I'm going to do something about this. So I want to try.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, look, in order to run a marathon, you got to take a step, right? So let me ask you then, we're talking about first responders, and we kind of alluded to it earlier, the St. Louis Police Department and the recent takeover of, kind of this state oversight control. I don't even know what the proper term is at this point. Long story short, basically the St. Louis Police Department is now unofficially being ran by the state, and that there's a Citizen Oversight Bureau that is, 5 residents of the city or however many it is. Again, I'm the pieces of the data. But the moral of the story is this, and I want to just kind of get your take on it. On paper, it feels like Big Brother. Kind of like a Margaret Atwood book, under his eye. But then there's the practical application of it. And I have a lot of friends that are first responders that are, policemen in particular, that are the little things that you don't think about it. And you just kind of alluded to it, with the ambulance reference, the ability to, if you have a car that has a flat, it has been hard for them to go through the city process, the city's leadership process, to just get it fixed so you can get back on the road. And those were the kind of things that they were really kind of logistically, but it doesn't feel good. It has a little bit of a smell to it, in spite of some of the good press coming out with, the fireworks roundups, and those things just seem to make sense. Where are you when it comes to the police, in particular, state control? Is this a short-term fix? Is this a long-term reality? Where do you see this thing going?
Well, we've just had a change in state law, and it passed the General Assembly and it was signed by the governor. So to answer your first question, short or long term, I think this is our reality into the indefinite future, barring some litigation that says otherwise. I think probably for a very, very long time, the city police will be functioning under the control of a police commission.
Okay, so let me interrupt and just ask questions as we go through this.
Sure.
Does that functionally mean then that the state of Missouri is now also financially responsible, not just putting the bill on the city of St. Louis taxpayers?
So there are two ways that are probably most direct in which the state has assumed some financial control. First, with respect to litigation, the St. Louis Police Department is now being defended across the board by the Attorney General's office. So before the takeover, the police department was being defended by either city councilors or outside counsel who were retained by the city to defend those officers. So very different. We now have assistant attorney generals that are managing those files. From a who pays, so that's a cost of defense. From a standpoint of who pays any judgments or settlements, the legislation specifies that the state is now responsible for a certain amount, and I think it's $2 million a year. I think.
Yeah, that's pennies.
But in the scheme of things, it's not much. Beyond that, it remains the responsibility of St. Louis City and its residents.
So let me give you a parallel, maybe an analogy, and tell me if I'm wrong. This is how it feels and sounds. It's like a Formula One team, okay, where you have the car, which is the city, and you have the driver, which is the city resident, and the police themselves. But then you have a team ownership or a team manager that is sitting there with the headphones on saying, slow down, go fast, we got this, etc. But then the car hits the wall, and this team manager is like, not my problem.
I think that's a decent analogy. In this situation, remember that the commission is entirely appointed by the state governor, in this case, Mike Kehoe. So the folks that at end of day have control, the everyday say for how the department operates, are all gubernatorial appointees. So they are answerable to him. And I think that's the real problem.
That's a rub. That's a big rub.
It is a rub. I know that officers within the ward who reached out to me before the takeover happened were nearly in unison in favor of state control. As a non-police officer, as someone who isn't on the streets, that bothers me. I mean, I want my mayor, I want my chief executive to have the ability to oversee the police department. And this becomes important not just in terms of setting policy and process, but also in day-to-day operation. Because remember that commission, at end of day, hires and fires the police commissioner, the police chief. So if you're a fan of Chief Tracy, and I am, by the way, I think he's done a wonderful job. Whether he stays in job isn't now a decision of mayor and our executive branch. It's now a decision that ultimately will rest with that commission. And I know some folks would say, "Now, Matt, hold on for a minute. I mean, one of those 5 voting members is the mayor of the city." Correct. Mayor Spencer sits on that commission. But there are 4 other appointees that have a call, and 1 non-voting member. So that's how we get to it's a 6-member commission, 4 voting appointed by the governor, 1 non-voting member.
Yeah, it's taxation without representation. I mean, this is like Tea Party kind of shit, and I understand it. I know why they did it. Look, we all know the feeling. We all go down, whether it's to South Broadway or just frankly downtown to a game or whatever. We see what's going on. Something had to be done. I think this was an extreme reaction to it. Short-term results seem to be okay. But I don't like the fact that there's no conversation that is a metric or a test or a line that can kind of bring it back into the realm of the land and not those that are from afar.
Well, and I think that's the challenge. Your question was, I think the way we started this, is this a short term or a long term?
Yeah, true.
It is a long term. I mean, this is the way we're set up. How do we reverse? Well, legislation has to be filed in Jefferson City that passes the House, that passes the Senate, and is signed by the governor. That was a very, very heavy push back in 2011, 2012, when we went from 150 years of state control back to city control. Mm-hmm. That was a heavy, heavy push.
Yeah, and again, devil's advocate on their side, they just simply looked at the reality of the numbers and They're like, no, that's not cutting it. But again, to our point earlier, you can't pick and choose what is the culture or the brand that is your city and just lean into crime and ignore the north side when it needs to be rebuilt.
Well, and here's the other issue too, and we mentioned earlier, perhaps off mic, the idea of gun control or gun legislation, and I think this is a classic. We are going to criticize how you manage a particular issue. In this instance, crime. But we're also going to tie both of your hands behind your back and watch you try to manage it.
Yeah.
There is a state statute passed in the early teens that says that Missouri law preempts or otherwise outweighs any law passed on the local level with respect to guns. And there's a whole litany. So we talk purchase, licensure, maintenance, keeping. I mean, the list is a mile long. So the state is saying our law controls. Of course, here in Missouri, we don't legislate with respect to guns at all. We basically say the state law preempts. And then if the municipality or the county, the thing like the city of St. Louis tries to do something, then the judge must strike the ordinance. And this happened within the last couple weeks down at the circuit courthouse, where we had a judge that struck down an ordinance that was meant to deal with one particular issue, which is car crime. And anybody that visits or lives in the city knows that we have an issue with, it's called car clotting, folks breaking into cars. And a lot of times it isn't a matter of that there's something on a seat or a floorboard. It's that the car window is broke and the glove box is open and the center console is rifled through because they're looking for a handgun. They're looking for a weapon. And so this was an ordinance passed in 2017. It was actually proposed by former Mayor Cruson while she was on the board, aimed at this particular issue. Again, we're not cleaning this problem up, but we're going to deal with a very real issue. And it was challenged, and again, it was struck down by the judge. I am not critical of the judge at all. I think his reasoning was dead on. If I'm sitting in his chair, I strike the ordinance down 10 out of 10 times.
Right.
He didn't have a choice. But it's a great example of criticism. Criticism by the folks in Jeff City about an issue, about how it's handled by the city of St. Louis, but then you're not letting us effectively manage it.
Literally handcuffing those that are trying to fix the issue.
Correct.
Which, I always think in terms of the economic side of this battle between the two, and again, I'm going to go out to California, Newsom threatening the federal government, here's what we're going to do. We're not going to send you in our taxes anymore. How's that? We're done subsidizing all you red states. And to a degree, St. Louis doesn't have the power. Legally, it'd be absolute chaos, nightmare, et cetera, civil war.
Could you imagine?
But the GDP here, it's a little bit more than Brazito, Missouri, or the Boot Hill, right?
Well, and that's where the realization's got to be.
Yeah,
it's got to be the recognition that the problems and the challenges and the ways to address those in outstate Missouri are not the same problems and challenges and remedies that we have in our metropolitan areas. There's got to be, and I don't think right now there's got to be that recognition.
Yeah.
There also needs to be the acknowledgement that whether you like it or not, the city of St. Louis drives this economy.
100%.
And that might be in your craw. You might be jealous about it, but that's the reality. So when we talk about that rising tide lifting all boats, the reality is if we go down in this city, there's going to be a lot of folks in outstate that are all of a sudden going to be struggling and trying to figure out how to make ends meet.
Fallout will be massive. All right, let's wrap this up. I got to get you back to your real world litigating and alder. Well, there's not an adjective or a verb for that. You back to your alderman life.
Sure.
We talked at the very beginning, the brand of St. Louis. You mentioned food. Let's just have a little fun with that. we've been killing it on the culinary side for a while. Not just that good old school Southern Italian red and Northern Italian white stuff over on the hill, but you pick the cuisine, and we're nailing it. What's your favorite these days? That is not in District 5.
Ward 5.
Ward 5. Sorry, yes.
Ward 5. I'm having a hard time getting past Louis. My wife and I, Lauren and I, went to Louis this past weekend. And so the thing I've got popping in my mind is the double chop that was on a bed of peppers.
Pork?
Oh, yeah.
Hell yeah. Bone in?
Bone in, and it was wonderful. It was massive. I couldn't finish it. We had as an app a hummus that was smooth and light, creamy.
A little feta mixed in there?
Oh, it was no feta.
Oh.
So it had some olive oil drizzled on it. And then we had a tomato plate, so a traditional summer garden tomatoes that had some fresh parm on it, and it was fabulous.
I mean, Louis is look at this point. We got a list of 100, 200, if not more, dining establishments from Little Fox, which I love, to Yamanji, to Louis, etc., killing it. Take food out of the equation. What's the one thing that you think really, and it can't be the arts, you and I both know this, what represents St. Louis in modern 2025 that isn't food?
Well, I think it's an attitude. I think it's an attitude of determination, of a busted lip. I think it's an attitude of chip on shoulder trying to prove oneself. I think St. Louis is the little brother that has been knocked around for a long time by Big Brother that is up on one knee and is doing its best to get up on both feet. And I think it's an attitude, and it's an attitude shared by a lot of people. It's an attitude, we talked about food, where those guys are leading the way, but we've got a terrific developer community that is right behind them, changing these neighborhoods and building these neighborhoods. And we've got a tremendous entrepreneur community here too. So I think it's an attitude of you ain't gonna keep us down. We're gonna get up.
So along those lines, I would say this, because I've been back since 04 roughly. Like I said, I grew up in Granite City, went away, lived in Chicago for like 8 years, came back in 04. It felt busy. It was always busy, even up through the 08 real estate bubble and burst and the recession and everything else. Everything around here has always felt busy. I think maybe it's just kind of a byproduct of the neighborhoods that I tend to gravitate towards. Things are happening. But whenever I would kind of zoom out and look at it, I knew without a shadow of a doubt that things were failing on a macro perspective, right? We're, losing people, businesses, we have optics issues. And I don't mean to be like disillusioned here just because you're an alderman and I want to talk nice about the city, but it does feel as if there's momentum. There feels as if there has been some shift. I can't put my finger on it. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's just maybe a change in City Hall. I don't know if it's just a particular building that's on Forest Park now or whatever that just kind of subconsciously is in the back of my head that I recognize, but it feels as if there's momentum. Would you agree? And do you feel the same thing? Because you decided to run to keep things, to improve upon things. Do you feel like we're moving in the right direction?
Absolutely. I think from a in the moment today perspective that Kara Spencer has a huge part to do with that. I think the way that she has handled herself with chin up, constantly talking in positive terms, challenging in positive terms, is a large part of maybe why you today feel good about where the city is. I will tell you, I ran for this job too because I also like where we were, or at least where my neck of the city of St. Louis was.
Yeah.
And again, in my mind, the Fifth Ward, my four neighborhoods in many ways are the backbone of South St. Louis. So maybe the entire part of St. Louis when we talk about that stretch between Hampton and Kings Highway. But I've been an up on St. Louis for a long time.
Right.
Because I see the successes on a neighborhood basis where I live. Whether it was 15 years ago in St. Louis Hills or today across Hampton and Southampton, there is a tremendous vibe where people have a really good day-to-day energy about what they do. Mm-hmm. The folks that are here, the folks that have bought in, and you know this, I mean, they are all banner wavers of the city of St. Louis. And it's hard to imagine many of them leaving. And I think our challenge is to take what I've observed for a handful of years, mm-hmm. what maybe you're observing over the last 6 months, and get more people outside of the city to recognize it and take a flyer on us and buy in and move their families here. I will tell you that the over 50, 55 group, at least in my neck of the woods, they're coming in. So now how do we get the families to come in? That's the next step.
All right, last question, and this is going to probably create a Hatfield and McCoy moment, but I'm going to give you an option. You can either take the Russell's Biscuit and Gravy down on Mackland, or you can take a Joya's Hot Salami. Which is it?
Russell's.
You didn't hesitate.
I'm going to get in trouble here with the folks at Joya's. I'm not a hot salami fan.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
But I love the biscuits at Russell's. So
good.
The Southampton people are going to be happy when they hear that.
There you go. Matt Devoti. Thank you, dude.
Yeah. Thank you.
I appreciate you coming in. Best of luck in the 5th Ward. And stay in touch. Keep me posted, because I think these kind of stories and exposing not only the characters that are behind the scenes and in front, people in this area have no idea what's really happening. So learning about the zoning changes, et cetera, that's a big deal, because this city needs wins, and I think these are good wins.
Will do, and I appreciate the time.
All right, man. Take care.
Thank you.
Tell me you're joking. Love. I know you guys love the show. Do me a little favor: like, review, follow, share. All easy, free. Helps me continue to bring on these guests. And thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time.